Well, welcome to Australia. The sun is out, the sea is lapping gently on the shore, the seagulls are flying around, we're sitting in the shade, of course, and we're all extremely excited about the cricket getting started in Brisbane. And with us here, correspondent Jonathan Agnew, who is here on his 9th Ashes tour, Stephen Finn, who's been involved in 3 Ashes trips, including the last time England won here 10 years ago, TMS commentator Simon Mann, and to add historical and statistical background, Andy Zaltzman. Right, let's talk about Queensland first of all. Let's talk about Brisbane. Let's talk about waking up in the morning, going down to breakfast in your hotel, the excitement of a day at the Gabba, and picking up the local newspaper, Agger's, the notorious Courier Mail. What's it like? I mean, their media can be particularly rough in Queensland.
Well, it can. I mean, it just feels finally as if the day has arrived, because under normal circumstances, of course, the tour have been going for perhaps a month beforehand, starting off fairly quietly, a warm-up game in Perth, and then maybe 3 first-class matches, and of course it generally gaining momentum as you go, usually Perth, South Australia, and then that game in Hobart, usually against someone like Australia A, is obviously a very important game, and lots of potential places up for grabs perhaps, or whatever it might be. So it's the whole general build-up is that steady progression towards the first day, and that first morning down there in the breakfast room in the hotel. Inevitably, there would normally be England fans packed in there, ready to go. They'd been up, we're jet lagged, probably been up all night. Some of them and landed the night before, and they're ready to go, and then it's just that sort of culmination of the weeks of preparation, all building up to finally getting underway.
I think it's that sense of it's a clean slate as well. It's 0-0, that real build up to the first day, the first test. What's going to happen? And then, of course, it all goes horribly wrong. Often, the case anyway. It's been the case for England. But it is that, isn't it? What is going to happen? How is the Ashes going to turn out? Is it going to be different this time for England? And think back to 2010-11, there was a sense it could be different this time. And as it turned out, it was.
What was it like arriving in Brisbane for that first test in 10-11, Vinny? Was there a feeling? Did you have that feeling as well? Because the Australians will do everything to believe that the Gabba is this extraordinary place, the Gabbatoire.
Yeah, they take great pride in calling it that and making your life uncomfortable. I think Queenslanders in general enjoy making it hostile when you come into Brisbane, and you get that from the moment you get off the plane, and the cameras are in your face when you step off the plane in Brisbane. There's guys there accosting you, usually the big players, so I was just hiding at the back thinking, like, why are they shoving cameras in Kevin Peterson's face here? And he's walking through the airport saying, get out my face, get out my face. And it's just that hostility as soon as you get to Brisbane, and that goes all the way to your journey to the ground. You get guys like in cork hats banging on the team bus because they get there so early because they want to see the English team arrive and be there for when you get to the ground. And yeah, I remember quite vividly on some of those mornings where you're rolling up to the ground, especially day one, and the bus can't get through. The bus has to go down this concourse and parks under the stand, but it's like this little private entrance, and you have to go through all the fans to get there. I remember vividly, the first morning, the bus got stuck, and all of a sudden they're banging on the window, banging on, welcome to the Gabbatoire, boys. And you're all sat in there on the bus, knowing that you're playing a game in a couple of hours, just being yeah, thanks a lot, guys. So they would take great pleasure and great pride in that first test match being a hostile environment, and they're very good at it.
And that hostile environment, I mentioned the Courier Mail, Jonathan. Just tell us about that. I mean, because they particularly had it in for Stuart Broad.
Yeah, they cancelled him, really. I mean, there was a team photograph up there. I remember they put on the back page, and he was just a sort of silhouetted out. So it was obviously Stuart Broad's shape. And they just refused to mention him. They called. They listed the likely team and another fast bowler. Which it
was 27-year-old medium pace bowler.
They refused to use the word Broad, and there were T-shirts going around. Stuart Broad's bloke. People will be wearing that all around. I felt very sorry for.
Apparently, he's still got a coffee cup. He's got a coffee cup which says Stuart Broad is a really bloke, which he says he gets out just at the point for games when Australia are doing badly.
Yeah, and he used that as motivation. He took 5 for in that test match, and I remember he had a copy of that newspaper in his place, and he was like, if I take wickets here or I have a good day and I have to do the press, I'm taking this newspaper. And it was a picture of, it was that picture of just like he who must not be named, like he's Lord Voldemort there on the front. And he walked into the press conference with it under his arm.
Yeah, he came out and there it was. He sort of opened it up and started reading it.
But then afterwards, they had to own him again after that, didn't they? 'Cause he got 5 for.
Yeah.
And I think even the most grudging Australian realised that after all that build-up and everything, actually, he's come out and got 5 wickets. So
And remind us why they had it in for him.
Well, it was because of what happened at Trent Bridge, where the Australians still insist that he nicked it to slip, but of course he didn't. He feathered it through to the keeper, who knocked it to slip, who took the catch. So it looked as though he thick-edged it to slip. He stood there, didn't walk, and it was given not out, and he got away with it. And that really riled the Australians, which I find extraordinary, really, when you think of how few Australians have walked over the years. I mean, Broad was just saying, I did thin edge it. Everyone saw he thin edged it, actually, when they saw the replay, thin edged it through to the keeper. But no self-respecting batter would have walked for that, would they? No Australian would have walked for that.
Not in that game situation either. And also, it was in the early forays of the DRS system, so people weren't used to standing, or you didn't just stand and wait for the umpire to make a decision, whereas now very, very few people would walk in that situation. I think they'd just wait for the umpire to make a decision.
What actually happened was that he knew he'd nicked it. He was waiting for the umpire to give him out and then to walk off, but of course the umpire didn't give him out and therefore he was stuck.
And they had no reviews left.
Exactly.
And anyway, the Australians have never forgotten it, strangely enough.
I've got an article here, actually, from Christopher Dorr, who was the Courier Mail's editor, and he talked about the sort of the build-up to that sort of cancelling of Stuart Broad, and he said, our initial swipe at the brackets friendless Kevin Peterson as the English and South Africans arrived in Brisbane was a dress rehearsal to test the mood of the tourists for our assault on the real villain. He said, we had a thought about going after Joe Root, but he seemed unworthy, and Ian Bell, but truthfully, despite his impressive figures in recent years, most of us can't take him seriously. He'll always be Shane Warne's bunny. So it had to be Stuart Broad they went after that incident at Trent Bridge. But Stuart's 6 for 81. He won back their respect.
Yeah.
In that
They
test
chose the
match.
wrong target by the sound of it for that one. It was very interesting. I mean, I think the first time that I went to the Gabba, I guess 4 years ago, I thought, wow, it's so exciting to be inside a big Australian test ground for the first time. But then you look around and it's actually quite an underwhelming stadium.
It's a horrible ground.
Thank you for saying that. I don't want to get cancelled by the Australians.
But it is. I mean, it's a soulless bowl, which is just exactly identical all the way around. I mean, there's mustard and yellow seats, and there is not a single feature you can't see beyond it. So from a commentator's perspective, even though you usually sit right at the very top, you can hardly see anything outside. And it's not like a ground with different stands or anything. This is just a bowl. And it's a huge contrast to what it used to be. It used to be actually a really lovely cricket ground, although it did have a dog track that ran around it as well. So they ran dogs around dog racing, but you used to be able to walk around it. And the stands were separate, and there was a really lovely area just to the right of where we would sit by the pavilion, called the Queensland Cricketers Club, and people would sit on the grass under parasols, drinking a beer or two or something like that. And it was a much more relaxed atmosphere to it, actually. But now it's a cauldron. I mean, even Melbourne, the MCG's got more features to it than the Gabba, which is just this vast bowl of noise, and I'm sure the atmosphere when you're in it must be incredible when it's full, because it just echo around. But anyone who's been, for instance, to the Cake Tin at Wellington, this is like a bigger version of that.
So what's it like to play in?
Yeah, I think one of the most apparent things is the heat inside. I mean, people talk about the humidity and the heat in Brisbane in general, but once you're inside that ground and you're in the middle of it, everything is centred on you, and it just gets so hot. And actually, when it's hot like that, it becomes hard to think. And that's why, talking about the acclimatisation to Brisbane, that's why England would have chosen to have their build-up in Brisbane, so they didn't have to move. That's why in 2010-11, why England sent the bowling group there early, in order to try and acclimatise and accustom themselves to those conditions. So the one thing that you do really notice as a player, like the noise is by the by, because you're used to playing in grounds that are noisy. You play in India where it's just this wall of noise, and that's a bit what it's like until you get really close to the boundary, and then you can hear the people giving you your individual abuse. But when you're in the middle of the ground, it's just noise, but it is that heat that really just hits you and makes it really hard to concentrate, which actually makes some of the guys' performances there over the years, that innings that Cook, Trott and Strauss all scored, the big runs, it makes that feat even more impressive just for the whole situation.
So Andy, remind us of some of the stats around the Gabba as a ground as far as England are concerned, because it's not always been a picture of failure, has it? As Finney's just said.
Not always. There have been 21 previous Ashes tests at the Gabba. England have won 4 and lost 12. So it's not a great record, but it's not, completely disastrous. And that, in recent years, as England have struggled in basically all the Ashes series here, apart from the 10-11 series since the Mike Gatting tour in 86-7, those stats have been skewed recently. But now, if you look at those 16 victories, to give an illustration of the importance of Brisbane, and which has generally been the first test on the series, 12 victories for Australia, 4 for England. The winning team at Brisbane has gone on to win the Ashes 14 of those 16 times, including the last 11 instances in a row since England came back from a Brisbane battering in 1954-55. There haven't actually been that many close Ashes games at Brisbane. Of those 16 positive results, there's only been one win by either 5 wickets or fewer or under 150 runs. And that was one of the most extraordinary games in Ashes history. If we can delve back into the distant past, 1950-51, Australia 228 all out on day one. Viewed by the press as an outstanding bowling performance by England. And then it rained in the days of uncovered pitches. There was a rest day and a day washed out, and England then had to bat on a treacherous rain affected pitch, and as it dried under the sun, these pitches became almost unplayable. So then the next 2 innings were England 68 for 7 declared, Australia 32 for 7 declared. Teams, as they declared to try and bowl while the pitch was still difficult. And then England, at the end of that second day of play, were 6 down for 30 and eventually all out for 122. So at one point 19 wickets fell for 81 runs. Wow. Which is all action.
Well, let's focus on the positive. I mean, Finney, what are your memories of that test match, that incredible second innings in 2010? Cook, Trott, Strauss, 517 for 1. Well, it's perfect day for a bowler, that one, wasn't it?
Well, it was. Yeah, I spent a lot of my time sleeping underneath the concourse in the dressing room, because the first innings I watched the first 4 balls and Strauss got out off the 4th ball, and I was like, well, I'm not watching any more balls of this test match because I'm the bad luck omen. And that's the way your mind works as a player. You try and find a spot in the dressing room where you don't lose wickets, and mine happened to be with the other bowlers sleeping and just chilling out downstairs.
Any excuse
absolutely any excuse. You pop up for the milestones, so you go out there for the glory to clap the guys in on the so it looks like you've been watching the whole time, but then the rest of the time you just disappear back down to the dressing room and rest and recuperate. And bear in mind, we'd spent a lot of overs in the field that game as well, and the second test was coming around quickly, so it was important that the guys did recover. That's my excuse anyway for being down under there. But yeah, it just sort of, not disbelief, I think, because I believe that we could do it, and I believe that those players could do it in that moment. But you do hear the stories about how at the Gabba the Australians get on top and the opposition team fails, but my overriding sense of that partnership, or those 2 partnerships, and the way that innings went, it gave everyone real confidence in the camp that we could actually stand toe-to-toe with these guys and then beat them, and then we proved that in the second test match.
For somebody who did watch it then, Simon, what was it like to watch?
No, I didn't watch it, actually. I was at home. I was doing the last 2 tests of that series and then the 1 days, but I do distinctly remember giving up on England and thinking, well, there's no point listening to TMS through the night. Sorry, Finney. Giving up on it. There's no point listening to TMS through the night. But you know what it's like when there's an Ashes match on. I'm sure lots of listeners will have this feeling. You wake up at various times of the night and you try to judge by how the commentator's talking what the score is if they don't give it initially. And I must have woken up about 4:30 in the morning. I thought, they're still batting. What on earth's going on? This is unprecedented, remarkable. So, from a listener's point of view, it's an incredible experience to wake up to that, having not really given England much of a chance, because they were 221 runs behind on first innings.
Yeah, I mean they were going to lose the game because it was A, logical they'd probably lose the game, and B, it was the Gabba and it was all coming back and so on. But it was remarkable. I mean, from our perspective, I turned up at the ABC box periodically during the day. And you've got a fair amount in there as well. I mean, the players think they get some stick. I can promise you, when I crawl into the ABC box and they're all chirpy and full of themselves, and it can be pretty tricky being the only pom in there as well. And of course, at the start of that innings, they thought they were going to win too. But then, of course, just like it does out on the field, the volume goes down a bit, and you could really feel the momentum. But the pitch was flat. There's nothing wrong with the pitch. You've got those three players who are all totally capable of playing innings like that, and they did. And the way to come away from that was, often in a drawn game, one team actually takes a huge amount away from a draw, especially the team that looked destined to lose. If you don't lose it, that's as good as a win. I remember going to Adelaide and we're checking into the hotel there, and it's the first time I'd seen, I think, Cook since then, and we had a chat in the lobby, and there's that real feeling of achievement. Not in, they got away from the Gabba with a draw, but just the way that they had done it, and it really made a statement about what that England team was capable of doing.
I mean, other than that game, since England had a fine win there in 86-7 with Ian Botham's final Test century, the headline individual performance. In 1990-91, England took a 42-run first innings lead and still managed to lose by 10 wickets. So it's been a pretty painful ground in various different ways. But that said, Australia is on a one-match losing streak at Brisbane, which might not sound like a lot, but they hadn't lost in their previous 31 tests at the ground between 1989 and their loss to India at the start of this year. So perhaps some of that...
third 11, wasn't it?
well, and that's we talked about before, that India did pretty much everything you're not supposed to do to win in Australia, and still won, including winning that, what was then the final test of that series at the Gabba.
And that's an interesting point as well, Finney, isn't it? The fact that it's famous Tim Payne sledge to, was it Rishabh Pant saying, "Can't wait to get you to the Gabba, mate," and then they lost. Will that play on their minds at all? The members of the team who played in that Test match?
I think there'll be some uneasy people in general in this game. Cricketers, as just creatures of habit, we don't like feeling or being underprepared, and there's going to be a lot of guys who are going to go into this Test match feeling rusty, not up to speed, not up to Test match, not battle hardened by the warm-up games or any sort of competition. So I think players on both teams are going to be uneasy going into this first game, but also the mental scars that loss against India may still have on the Australian team, I think could certainly play into it, and England are going to have to use that to their advantage going into this first Test match, I feel, in order to try and take advantage of that.
We should also remember as well, Simon, you talk about the fine margins in sport, don't you? The things way that games, series can go one way or another. And I mean, James Vince 4 years ago at the Gabba could have made it very different for England.
Yeah, brilliantly run out by Nathan Lyon. It was just a sort of fraction of a inch or whatever, and a wonderful piece of fielding. Who knows, he could have gone on and got a big 100. Mind you, David Milan got a big 100 in Perth and didn't kick on. His Test career stalled, but he's back. So, even if he got 100, it's no guarantee that he would have gone on to have a really successful career. But England had an opportunity in that match. It felt, batting first, and at one stage they got about 300, and Australia were 200 for 7 and recovered. And it felt like England were on top. They've done quite well at some parts of sort of Gabba Test matches. In 2013 they did well as well. Australia were 130 for 6, and everyone's thinking, "Oh, here we go again, England on top. They're going to go on and win the series," because they just come off the back of beating them in England. But then someone called Mitchell Johnson, got involved. He had a pretty handy time of it.
Well, it was extraordinary, wasn't it?
So what are our other Gabba highlights, Simon? What about you?
Well, my first Test match at the Gabba was 94-5, and I distinctly remember that first ball from Phil de Freitas, which we've talked about a little bit, short outside the off stump, cracked away by Slater, 4 runs. It just felt, all right, remember that build-up we talked about at the start, and then it's 0-0, then it all dissipates. But I remember on the final day, Glenn Mcgrath played in that Test match, and it was his 8th Test, and he'd done sort of okay-ish. He'd taken his wickets at 38 so far. There was no sort of real indication that he was going to be, one of the greats of all time. He's obviously a very promising bowler. He was out for naught. He didn't take a wicket in the match. And I remember, it was sort of the early days of the Barmy Army, and I was talking about the redevelopment of the ground. There was a little hill, and the England fans were there, and they were chanting to Glenn Mcgrath, "You're the worst bowler in the world." Not a word of a lie, "You're the worst bowler in the world." And Glenn's response, it wasn't verbal, but there were one or two fingers involved in his response to the bar. And I think it's fair to say, subsequently, he did have his say, didn't he? Those 560
He didn't actually bowl very well in that game.
No, he
It's the
didn't.
first time I'd seen him.
Yeah.
And I remember Jim Maxwell had been on about this chap, Glenn Mcgrath. And I thought, okay, he's got a bit to go yet. But he certainly made up for it.
0 for 101 in the match.
Yeah.
And a duck as well in his only innings.
Yes, well, I think occasionally, you can be proved wrong, and the Barmy Army conclusively were on that occasion. Finny, do you have? I mean, you clearly have some good memories of the Gabba, but you must have some pretty tough memories as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm lucky. The only Test match that I've played at the Gabba, I took 6 for, although it was 6 for plenty, still took 6 wickets, and we drew that Test match. I mean, tours after that, the 13-14 one was the tour that we lost 5-0. I didn't play at the Gabba, missed out, and then had action problems and lost confidence in what I was doing. And the Gabba was sort of the start of that. You go around chasing your tail, and the lonely walk. It's a long walk as well, from the dressing room up through the back of the stands, so you don't have to walk past people, and then out the back door and into those nets. At the Gabba, you're sort of in a bowl with people looking at you, and the training sessions there by myself in that series weren't the most mentally freshening memories that I have inside my head, but I've experienced them, and I went back there subsequently and took a 5 for in an ODI, so I feel like I conquered those demons. But there are certainly some tricky memories there, and I think that it is one of those grounds where it's quite easy to have vivid memories of it because it's such a unique place.
I haven't mentioned Simon Jones yet either, have we? I mean, that horrendous injury.
Because was that day one.
Yes,
it was,
and it was like the turf just sort of rolled up. He was running back from mid-on. I remember I was commentating, and he sort of slipped and skidded, and one of those sort of almost dive flick backs with all those things combined. And it was just like a roll of turf, just roll up underneath him. And I mean, you could tell straight away that was a really nasty injury. And again, it was a terrible blow for him, but an awful way for the series to start.
And it's one of the things that we actually talked about before the Test matches that we've played there, is that the grass is real thatchy. So in England, they're like bowling lawns, the outfields, and you can dive, you can land on your knee however you want, and generally, unless it's really wet, your knee's not going to plug and you're not going to damage it. But the Simon Jones incident is something that we actually spoke about before the Test matches that we've had there, in the sense that the grass is real thatchy, and your spikes plug in it, your knee, like everything plugs in it. So they're like, if it's a borderline call of 50-50, leave it alone, or find another way to stop it. Don't go diving on your knee, because it is the sort of place where you can do yourself some damage.
Somebody remind Mark Wood of that?
Yeah, we need to remind them all of it.
Yeah,
we need to get this message out there. Don't dive.
My last Gabba memory, basically the last thing that happened at a Gabba Test match, was the Cameron Bancroft press conference at the end of the last game, when Australia won the match by 10 wickets. Bancroft on debut, quite a successful debut, made 82 not out in the second innings, and there were suddenly rumours around that Johnny Bairstow had headbutted him. And what on earth is going on? And then Bancroft comes to the press conference and tells the story. It didn't sound like a headbutt at all. It was like a sort of bizarre sort of coming together of heads it was almost like a sort of friendly gesture. I mean, I don't know. I never heard of this before, Finny.
No, I wasn't there, to be fair, but it sounded to me like, in two footballers, like they want to act like they're hard and they're tough, so they like go foreheads against each other, but then they realise we're actually really not. So it sounded like one of those sorts of scenarios.
I remember Cameron Bancroft saying, they've weighed my head and I've got the heaviest head in the Australian squad, and Steve Smith sitting alongside him and falling about laughing. It was bizarre,
a proper
wasn't
press
it?
story, that, though, wasn't it?
It was a real beat-up.
Yeah.
I've never been to a press conference like that. It was unbelievable. I mean, it was absolutely packed room of Australian and English journalists and other journalists as well, and people were utterly mesmerised. Did he headbutt him or not? And you're right, Steve Smith was laughing alongside him. And then presumably Joe Root came in afterwards, utterly sort of bemused by the whole thing. I can't remember if Root had been in before or afterwards, but it was utterly surreal day, that.
It really was.
But the bottom line was Australia crashed England by 10 wickets. And that's often what happens at the Gabba. It's such an important game.
Absolutely. Just a few months later, Smith and Bancroft were sitting having a press conference in Cape Town in rather different circumstances. Jonathan, I feel like we should finish on a kind of a light note on one of the most famous Queensland stories, if it's not a Brisbane story, and that's David Gower and the Tiger Moth.
Well, of course, yes. It wasn't the Gabba, but it was on the Gold Coast, where England, of course, have been warming up for this. A place called Carrara, and they were playing a first-class match on. It's basically a rugby ground there, with floodlights up and so on, and it was a nice, gentle, casual sort of a warm-up. I seem to recall. Not much going on, a bit of a drive to get there, and who was batting at the time? We had Alan Lamb and Robin Smith were batting at the time. One of them had just got 100, Lammy, I think. When suddenly, I was sitting with Chris Martin Jenkins, actually. You could hear in the distance a sort of rumbling noise. I thought, wonder what that is. And then, they weren't going terribly fast because tiger moths don't, but these biplanes just going down over our heads, really quite low, and Lamb and Smith are both waving their bats. And the first one was followed by a second, and they sort of waggled their wings and disappeared away into the floodlights. I remember CMJ saying, "What on earth is that?" or something, sort of cursing. I thought that's rather strange. And I was working for the Today newspaper at the time, and those days, a long time ago, but most newspapers had a photographer actually attached to them, if you like, and mine was called Adrian Morell, and he came to me during the next interval and said, just between us, I goes, "I'll tell you who's in that aeroplane, because I've got pictures." It was Gower and Morris. I thought, really? So I'm a very naive young tabloid journalist. I was in those days. Like, oh, crikey. So I think there might be a story. So I'm sitting there anxiously thinking about this, all to myself, it was a bit of fun. Somehow, I think Morell must have told someone else, because anyway, it got out more widely. And at the end of the day, there was this... Simon mentioned this surreal press conference. I'll challenge him with this one, where Peter Lush came out, who was the manager, with Mickey Stewart. And I think it was Ian Todd from The Sun. Said, any thoughts, Peter, on that fly pass there by David Gower and Morris? And there's an absolute sort of blank face on Lush's face. He had no idea. And I remember Mickey Stewart running out the back. It was just like in a gymnasium, shouting, "Anyone seen Gower?" And this reply came back saying, "He's gone for a run, manager," which of course is complete absurd. Gower never ran for anything. In fact, they were back at the airfield having more photographs taken because Graham Morris, another photographer who people will know, needed to get the pictures or he'd be in trouble with his office for not having the photos. So Gower and Morris are actually back there staging up more photographs in all their Biggles equipment. And I mean, the best line of it all, really, was that Gower decided that he was going to go on this, hadn't got any money on him, so he approached Peter Lush to say, "Could I possibly afford all my expenses, please, manager, for the next couple of weeks or so? I'm a bit short." So Peter Lush handed over some money, which of course inadvertently he didn't realise was actually paying for the flight. Bruce McGarvey was the name of the pilot. How about that? For someone who always forgets names. I'll never forget Bruce McGarvey, who, I remember the quote, said, "David wanted to drop some water bombs on the pitch, but I told him that wouldn't be a very good idea." Off they went. And sadly, the sad thing is that actually Gower and Gooch really fell out badly over that, and it still sort of lingers in the background, unfortunately, because of course Gower was fined. It all felt a bit inappropriate.
Yeah, I don't know. Cricketers today, just very boring.
Yeah, no character.
No character at all.